We were, there we go. Welcome everyone, and thank you for your patience as we work out our technology. We are so happy to have all of you with us tonight. My name is Pam Nurse, and I'm the Executive Director of the Federation for Children with Special Needs. And tonight is part of our monthly Connecting Families series. And we are really thrilled to have as our special speaker tonight, the Federation's own Family Ties Director, Pat Cameron, who is going to be talking about the wonderful world of data and how we can be using data to tell a story. This is a very, very important topic, and one that we are going to be diving into quite a bit over the next few months. So we're very, very happy that you have joined us. So at this point, I am going to introduce and turn the program over to our wonderful facilitator, Beth Bostic, a board member of the Federation. So thank you so much for being with us, Beth, and we'll put it in your hands.
Well, thanks so much, Pam, and good evening, everybody. It's good to see many of your faces and many of your names and to be here tonight. When I saw the topic for this evening, it brought a huge grin to my face, because one of the things I learned very early in the special education process is nothing happens without data and assessment in special education. And so if you don't understand the important role of data and how to access it and how to leverage it to support your child, you do have a bit of a disadvantage in the special education process. So we are really excited to have Pat Cameron here to help us with that. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you want to be using translation and interpretation services, the link for that is included in the chat. So please make sure that you avail yourselves to that, and we will look forward to hearing from those of you who use the service, how it works for you. We really appreciate your feedback in that. And then also, I will be monitoring the chat for questions as we go along, but we're going to let Pat get through as much of her presentation as possible first, and then we will field questions, both those that have been received already and others as they come in. So, and also, if you're not aware, we are recording this session. So if you would like to turn off your camera or anything like that, that's absolutely fine. So please, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will do our best to answer as many of them as we can this evening. And of course, as always, if we're not able to do that, we will collect all of the remaining questions and answer them and make them available on the website. So without further ado, a friend and a colleague and a superwoman, one Pat Cameron. Take it away, Pat.
Well, that's quite the introduction. So I hope everybody can see my screen, and excellent. And so thank you so much. We are very excited. And I say we because I co-wrote this with Cambria Russell, who is just unable to be here with us tonight. And so I want to make sure that you all appreciate the fact that we have the perspective from our director of the Massachusetts Family Engagement Center. And so we'll go through this, and as a data 101, it's really introducing you to the concept of data. And it's a precursor, as was mentioned, to some of the work that we'll be doing with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in the coming months, as we sort of take it up to the systems level. But to give you a little bit of information, we are very happy to be here from the Federation. We are doing a lot of work here internally in doing cross-program collaboration, and so that we are indeed one federation, and we're all participating with one another. And tonight is one of a series of conversations to really bring information to families, to hear from families. And tonight we're going to be talking about data, all kinds of data, how to look at it, and what's the story that it tells you. And so it really is taking that simply data is information. And again, this is myself and Cambria. And the bottom logo is just to introduce you to the fact that we wrote a grant that really provided many of the resources we're going to be using tonight for families in understanding data. And both at the early intervention level, the early childhood special education level, and in school age as well. So there are resources that will be sprinkled into the chat throughout our time together tonight. And I want to give kudos to Leslie, who is going to help provide some of that as well. So when we think about data, how do we deal with data on a daily basis? And, much like this picture shows, data is everywhere. It's just surrounds us like the fall leaves do at this time of year. And we really want to think about, what are the just typical things we use on a daily basis? And I would encourage you to just put something in the chat that you use every day that has some sort of data attached to it. And I'll get you started. What about your cell phone? There is so much information stored in your cell phone. It's a source of data that you use on a daily basis. The other source is, what about your GPS? If you're like me, I can't remember how to get from here to the next destination without plugging an address into my GPS. All of that data that gets me there and gives me choices on how I can move from one place to the next is all stored data. It can even be as simple as thinking about your shopping list. It's how you take that inventory of the things that you've used throughout the week, the things that you're running low on. It's all information that feeds into a source. So your shopping list is a perfect example of how we use data on a daily basis. And our hope tonight is that we can inspire you to think about data more widely and to really apply this to your own family situation, to your sons and daughters who are, if they're receiving special education, how that works out, and how data is applied in those situations. And then we want to take it up to the next level and look at it from a systemic way as well. So tonight, as we sort of just laid out, we're going to, why learn about data? What's in it for me? What is data? And how data pertains to our children, data in special education. And then we want to introduce you to a process called Look, Think, Act. And that really is an exercise in what are the questions to be asking about data? What do I see when I look? What does it make me think about? Is everything there that I would want to know? Is there something missing? And then what do I do with that data? And how do you act upon it? And so we'll use this technique throughout tonight. And hopefully it's something, and we've got resources that we'll put in the chat later on where you can learn more. Because there will be opportunities coming up to really exercise your inquiry, your curiosity about data. So why learn about data? And, and we're, as I said before, we're surrounded by data, and data helps us make good decisions. Many of you may have heard the phrase data-driven decision making. And if your son or daughter has an IEP or an IFSP, individual family service plan for those in early intervention, and an individual education program for those in special education, data is essential. It drives the goals, it maps out a future, and provides you with information. So when you think about all those different kinds of data, Simply put, data is just information. And none of us, I mean, I'll speak for myself. I am not a data expert. I have been fascinated by data. I use data on a daily basis in my work. I use some of those same techniques in my personal life, as I introduced to you a couple of slides ago, and rely on the data that's in my cell phone, the data in my GPS, and it just helps make my life easier. And so I hope by sharing these kinds of tips and really boiling it down to the story that data tells you can make it more approachable, more accessible, perhaps less intimidating, and really provide you with some basic skills in having those larger conversations. So we are, as I said, surrounded by data. And I love this graphic because it makes you really realize how much data is in our life. We get our bank statements or we access our accounts online. That tells you all the data you need to know, whether you can afford a vacation, whether you can afford that new coat, whether you can even go grocery shopping that week. It's based on the data that is in your financial bank statement. How many of us rely on the weather report for not only whether we take an umbrella, but what weight coat do we need? How do we dress our kids in the morning and send them off to school? So all of that is based on data that other people gather and present so that we can access the information. There's, again, all these different, doctor appointments, the scientific, everything that goes behind the knowledge of a disability or an approach to a treatment plan. All of that is scientific data that experts have conducted to really advance the field of medicine. And we benefit from the work of others when you think about data. And when we look at data, there's actually two kinds of data. There's this qualitative aspect of data, and there's the quantitative aspect of data. And when you think about the difference, quantitative is, and again, I'm sort of boiling this down, it's the quantity, it's the numbers. It's what are the graphs, what are the charts, what are the statistics that give me the data that I need. Attendance is quantitative data. It marks off how often your son or daughter attends school. The qualitative is the feeling, it's the quality. It's how it makes you appreciate what's happening. It's the adjectives that are used to describe data, both the positive and the negative, but it's that qualitative that really brings it to life, that gives it that story. And so, I just want to just share those two definitions with data as we think about looking at it and analyzing it and so forth. So how do we use data when it comes to eligibility? And, put your thoughts in the chat. Let us know what you're thinking about. But data drives eligibility decisions. And I'll pause for a moment to see if anybody's put any thoughts in the chat.
We have one question around how you can use or how you can measure qualitative data in an objective way.
It's difficult. It's very difficult. And, when we go to the exercise about look, think, and act, we're going to talk about just that. So hold on to that question. So when you think about eligibility, there's assessments that talk about the present level of performance. There are assessments that diagnose a disability or the existence of a disability. There are observations, and observations is where you get into the qualitative stuff. It's, are you looking for certain aspects or trends in that are typical for a child with a certain diagnosis? You know, are you counting? Again, that's quantitative. Are you counting how many words a child has, and, you know, and forms of communication? So again, it's using that assessment data that determines whether a child is eligible for services or not. And that's true for both early intervention and for special education. And how does data pertain to your child? And we did get a question about this prior to tonight with somebody who asked about, you know, how do you measure progress? And, you know, and I think, and this was before this was after I had this slide, so I was already intending to talk about it. Progress reports are something you get on a regular basis if your child is receiving services. And it really takes a look at what progress are they making towards meeting the goal on their IEP. And it should be measurable. It should, the goal should be measurable and progress should be measurable. And if it's not, ask for more information. How did you determine that? And that's when we think about, when we look at data, what's missing. And if you have progress reports that are just very nicely written that says what a joy Johnny is to have in the class, that's not progress. That's qualitative data because it's a feeling. It's a, you know, it's expressing the pleasure of having Johnny in the classroom, but it's not real. It doesn't refer to data. So think about how you can ask those questions, particularly both at the eligibility determination and at any IEP meeting. Are looking at the data that's given you ahead of time, and remember to ask for it ahead of time so that you have that opportunity to really take a deep dive into what's the story that this progress report is telling me. Is my child on track to achieve their goals by the end of the school year, by the end of the season, whatever that time frame is? And think about, you know, what are the attitudes when you think about your child? You can gather data from your own child. What's their attitude towards school? All of this would be, you know, that qualitative data. Do they get up eager to go in the morning? Are they coming home full of stories, whether they sign, whether they could talk, however they communicate? Are you getting feedback from them about how the day went? That's all good data to know. You've got report cards, you've got observations that you can make either in the classroom if they play on a sport team and an after-school program. All of those are opportunities to think about, you know, what are they getting out of it? And is it addressing their needs? Is it meeting their goals? So it's a very brief way of making this personal and making it apply to you and your family. But then I want to take you on the next level. And that really is getting up into the balcony view. What's the balcony view of data when it comes to the system? And this is where we really all have this opportunity to participate with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in their upcoming focus groups. And there'll be information on accessing those. They will be in multiple languages, and the department is really looking for not just sharing the data that they have, but asking for your input. So the Department of Public Health is the state agency that oversees early intervention here in Massachusetts. They have an interagency collaborating council, which routinely hears about the data that they are collecting, the number of children assessed, the number of children found eligible, and so forth. And then we have the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which looks at that data for kids 3 to 21. And they too have to be collecting data on a regular basis and finding a way to report it out. Each of them is responsible to submit to OSEP, which is the Office of Special Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Education, an annual report, which talks about the indicators, and we'll get to that in a minute, and how the state is moving towards meeting those indicators. Some are compliance indicators where the department, and let me move on to the next slide because I think that's here. The Department of Education has set some targets. They're called compliance. It means the district has no choice. They don't always meet them by compliance, but there's an expectation that 100% of some of the indicators, or 0%, and we'll get into that when we talk about the compliance indicators. And then there are performance indicators where districts set targets. The state sets targets on how they hope to improve. It's based on information gathered in the foundation stage, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, and hopefully shows a trajectory of improvement. That's true for both early intervention and for Section 619, which is the early childhood part of IDEA, and special education. And so the two departments, and they're represented by the left and right side of the screen, have very similar expectations when it comes to collecting and reporting out on data. So in early intervention, there are 11 indicators, and they are listed here. The compliance indicators are listed on the left, and the performance indicators are listed on the right. And again, 100% compliance is what's expected in those compliance indicators. And it includes that timely provision of services. If a child is found eligible, they should have an IFSP, all their assessments done, and an IFSP written and services started within 45 calendar days. And all of this is defined within both the Department of Public Health and in the DESE and State Performance Plan, State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report, the SPP APR. Indicator 7, again, a compliance indicator, talks about the timely provision of an IFSP. Very related to indicator 1. Indicator 8 is early childhood transitions. Every child in EI, whether they get discharged before age 3 or they move on and get referred from EI to early childhood special ed, has to have a transition plan. Everybody, regardless if they're moving on to special education, and many of those young children don't. They don't qualify. They're in EI because of some risk factor, or they were born premature and now reach their milestones and are on track for typical development. And then the other compliance indicators is around resolution of conflicts, resolutions of disagreements, and so forth. And then on the right, you have those performance indicators where they set targets about where services happen. They're supposed to happen in the natural environment. How are they doing?
I like that you're in
And
your clothes.
what are child outcomes? Child outcomes for EI are the same child outcomes in early childhood. Behaviors to get their needs met, how they have a way of communicating, and they have some self-help skills. And it goes on. Child find, and child find is just the way they call, how do we go out and identify those kids who might be eligible for services? Are we meeting with community groups? Are we advertising in the local paper? Public schools have the same responsibility. It should be mediation, not medication. There's where my mind was. And so that's a typo, and I apologize for that. Indicator 11 talks about state systems. And then I'm going to try and move my bar because it's of the state improvement plan. Both early intervention and DESE have to come up with a state level plan on how they're going to improve their data. So when we think about special education, we now have 17 indicators total. And here's where you get into the 0%. 2 of those compliance indicators have to do with disproportionality. And it's disproportionality of boys versus girls, young children of color versus children who identify as white, and in special education. And then the overrepresentation or underrepresentation in the specific disability categories. There should be no disproportionality. It should reflect the population of children served within that community. And so the expectation is that there's 0% disproportionality. And then you have the other 3 compliance indicators, which talk about child find, which is the same sort of activity that is involved in early intervention. Now, here's an interesting part. The transition from Part C, which is early intervention, there's an expectation that those children who are referred from EI have an IE, if eligible, have an IEP developed by their 3rd birthday. It's an expectation that that happens for 100% of the kids. We know during COVID, it did not. And so it's interesting to listen to what DESE has to say about how they're going to try and get those numbers back up. And then we have the compliance indicator about secondary transition. Every child in Massachusetts, starting at the age of 14, should have a transition plan as part of their IEP. And so in other states, it starts later than that, but it can also be something you start as part of your team discussion when it seems most appropriate, even if younger than age 14. And then we have a slew of these performance or indicators where they set targets. They can determine what is happening, what the local information says. They're looking at their results. What is it telling you? What's the story here? What are graduation rates for students with disabilities? What are dropout rates for students with disabilities? Assessments, suspension and expulsion. I mean, these are all hot topics when it comes to special education. The educational environment. How many kids are included in general education classrooms, both when we're talking about those students 6th through 12th grade, as well as those students preschool 3 to 5-year-olds. How many of them are receiving their services in what we would call an inclusive setting? Then what are the post-school outcomes? They should be tracking how many kids are going on to post-secondary education, how many students are going on to work, how many may be eligible for day services through perhaps the Department of Developmental Services. And all of that comes through the transition planning. Resolution sessions. I'm sorry? Nope, okay. Resolution sessions, mediation, which I spelled right here. And then we have the state systemic improvement plan, all mirror the same indicators that are there in early intervention. So again, let's take a look at this whole theory of look, think, and act. And when we think about our data, there's different ways of looking at it. And it's a process of, what do you see purely on the surface? And we'll look at an indicator in the next slide. What catches your attention? Do you have one of those aha moments when you're looking at state data? How do results vary from different groups, from topics, from time points? So when you think about disproportionality, could be those different groups. Topics could be transition, post-secondary planning, and so forth. And then what trends and patterns do you see or not see? So looking is just not at just what's there, but what do you think is missing? What data, what questions do you that are unanswered for you when you look at data? And then you think about those opportunities to digest that. And how does it make you feel? What surprises you and doesn't alarm you? What does it feel like after you get through that look, when you're looking sort of, what are the facts? What do you see? And then having that moment where you think about, how does it make you feel? And then the ACT section actually didn't fit on this slide. And Leslie's going to put a resource in here for you of where you can get this whole page so that you have all the information in that look, think, and act phase when you're talking about what story does the data tell me? So let's look at an example. And I keep losing my cursor. There it is. Indicator 6 is preschool environments. I am an early childhood person at heart. I taught preschool. I was the 619 coordinator for the state of Massachusetts and was very much embedded in these indicators in a previous job. And so the measures, again, think about, the qualitative part of this is a measurement. What is the percent? So again, there's your measurement. You're looking at the percent of children with IEPs age 3, 4, and 5 who are enrolled in a preschool program. And you may think, well, 5-year-olds are kindergarten. Well, many of those 5-year-olds turn 5 while they're in preschool. They go to kindergarten oftentimes, after they turn 5. And so they count those 5-year-olds. How many of them are attending a regular early childhood program and receiving the majority, and again, so that's a measurement of their special education and related services in a regular early childhood program? And for the public schools, in preschool, the curriculum framework is inclusive of preschool. And so you want to make sure that they have access to the general curriculum when you're talking about the regular early childhood program. Or are they placed in a special education class, a sub-separate classroom, as many people refer it to? Or are they seen in a residential program or another, like a collaborative, or what's called an out-of-district program? And then how many of them are receiving their special education and related services at home? How many didn't qualify for a program at all, but are only getting a single service? And so again, we think about, how many children are in the district, and then sort of compartmentalizing them in these 3 buckets. So again, that's sort of what the expectation is. And so let's look at the data. This is right off of DESE's website. And I think we have a link for all of that as well. And so again, the sub-indicators are that regular preschool program, the special education setting, or the home setting. And you can see, well, I don't want to, what do you see? Let me pose that question and, and invite you to put something in the chat. What does this data tell you? I'll set the stage. Do the numbers go up or do the numbers go down?
So people are seeing that numbers are going up for special education settings. And but they've been steady for home setting, but up for special ed, definitely up for special ed.
So the next part of, the story is, what does it make you think about?
One person is saying why.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Data should always raise questions. Always. And so I encourage you to, put your thinking caps on when you're looking at some of this and ask simply why. If there's a trend in one way or another, what happened? Now, we could think about how COVID may have influenced some of this. I think that's a perfectly legitimate question to be asking. And what resources are available in a district so that perhaps more children, young children, 3 to 5 year olds, could be included in a regular preschool program.
Pat, one person is asking a question. Is it possible that some kids were counted twice, that where they may have started in regular preschool and got placed out of district in the same school year?
No, because this is a point in time data. This is this is point in time. So it's not a cumulative across the year. It's they submit their data on February 1st based on child counts. I think it's back in October.
Okay.
So it may even not include every child because kids, as you know, turn 3 all year long and, are entering preschool. There's a revolving door according to their birthdays.
Okay.
So here's the targets. Again, think about, back, it's all based on that foundational data. What are the present levels of performance? And then what's the expectation of, across time? And here, while the numbers in the reporting in special education settings went up, the goal is to decrease that and increase the number included in general preschool classrooms. And then I apologize for how little print the home services came across. But here they have given a high and low range, which is the only time I've seen this, is when looking at how they want to set targets. And then they'll look at next year's data and compare it to the targets. If they don't meet their target, if they are under their target, they call it slippage. How far off the mark are we? And they have to put something in the state improvement plan to raise those numbers, or how are we going to come closer to our targets? So the department is responsible for doing that. And districts are also responsible for doing that because districts report their cumulative data. There's nothing identifiable in here. It's all aggregate numbers of kids within the district. And if they have so few children that it perhaps would identify that one child in preschool, they don't have to submit the data because they don't want to highlight or pinpoint or shine a light on one particular student or a handful of students. I think the number is 6. If there's more than 6, they report them. So here's the information, and the website is across the top, and Leslie's going to pop this in the chat as well, is where you can find more information about the State Performance Plan, the SPP, and the annual performance report. And again, this is just highlighting DESE, and because we will be collaborating with them around our focus groups that are coming up starting next week, where they will be reporting out both compliance and target setting data and looking for your feedback. And so I encourage you to visit this website. You can see across the top there that it's available in multiple languages by clicking on the link for the desired language. and being able to take a look and learn more, take that deeper dive. I thought after I had this whole slide presentation that I ought to have a visual of somebody diving. And because we really want to not just look at the surface, but take that look underneath. And again, it's that look, think, and act. Those 3 stages that really give you some information to be talking about when you're looking at data. Not everything is self-explanatory. Some of it can be, confusing as heck. And so it's really helpful to look at what you see on the surface, how it makes you think, what's missing, what's there, what more information do we have. And again, Cambria and I went through this training with the DAISY Center, which is the Data Systems Center. And we've been in the field for years, learned a lot. And so we'll put a link in, actually, it's the next slide. So we'll just go to that. And Leslie's going to put this website in the chat as well. There are resources there for families. And so they want this information to be accessible. They want to encourage families to love your data, like many of us do, and to be able to apply some of these strategies, both at your personal family situation and at this higher systems level data. And so, tonight is really just sort of an opportunity to introduce you to this concept of analyzing data, gathering, what's gathered, not that you can gather all the data that you need for you and your family, but what's being reported to you, both as it pertains to your child, whether it's the eligibility, whether it's progress reports, report cards, and so forth. And then what's happening at the systems level. And here's where you have a chance to participate. The Federation is co-sponsoring these focus groups where we will be offering breakout rooms within the Zoom session for the different language groups. And there will be a DESE staff person in each one of those language groups. And they are going to tackle this list of outcomes, of indicators. And the first one is around child find and early childhood transition. And if you remember from a previous slide, those are compliance indicators. They should be at 100%. I've had a sneak peek at the slides that are going to be presented next week, and they are dreadfully off 100%. So come and learn, come and hear, come and absorb, and then, find a way that you can ask those questions. They sincerely want family input. I mean, this is just not an exercise. They really want to hear from families. And so Cambria and I thought this was just a fabulous opportunity to come to you tonight in this Connecting Families session to really think about, how do we look at data? Perhaps, give you some information that you didn't have prior to tonight on how do you look at data and the different kinds of data and the stories that it tells you. And so you see all the dates here. You can use that QR code and scan it to register. You can also go on our website and the registration information will be available there as well.
I put the link to register in the chat, Pat.
Thank you so much. So when you think about, how, what do you want to do with your sort of next steps? And I opened this up, I did, one of the questions that came in prior, when somebody registered was, how do I look at my progress reports when they don't appear to have measurable things? It's a fabulous question. You did exactly what you need to do, is look and think. And now your next step is act. And so bring your questions to your IEP team, your child's classroom teacher, your child's team chairperson, whoever you can get the ear of, and ask those questions. when you're getting a new IEP or your child is up for re-eligibility, what data are they collecting? What are they looking at? Are they talking to you? Are you part of that data collection? Is there a family history? You know, you have the ability to participate in that process as well. So think about the ways that data can impact and lift up the experience that you have with your school system, with your early intervention program, with your family when it comes to, you know, how are we planning our next vacation? Let's collect all the data. Let's figure out where we want to go. Let's look at how much it's going to cost. Let's get some of those off the list because of that. You know, think about the ways that you just naturally create data and then apply that in the context of schools and special education and so forth. So I want to thank you very much. I want to open it up if there are questions. I hope that this has been helpful, that you can discover your own data story and how much there is there already, and discover where you want to gain more to add to your own story, to add to your son or daughter's story, and being able to articulate that confidently in a meeting, in a presentation, in a support group, you know, whatever your community is, to be able to lift that up and tell your story. So here's contact information for both myself and Cambria. We welcome your questions after tonight. We hope that you will, you know, take a look at the DAISY website and the resources that are there for families. And we hope that you will sign up to be part of one of the focus groups. And it may be out of interest because that's the age group your child falls into. It may be because you teach preschool and you want to learn more about those preschool outcomes. If your child's in early intervention, how do you plan forward? And, you know, what information would you like to know? So, questions?
So first, thank you, Pat, for giving us this overview and helping us to understand kind of how all of the, essentially all the data that's coming from IEPs and report cards in schools is then going to the Department of Education and helping us to better understand how are we doing against these performance and compliance indicators. A couple of questions have come through kind of the beginning of the process. Like, so one parent is asking, and I hear this question often, how do you collect meaningful data for a team meeting and for an IEP meeting? You know, so they appreciate the macro, but we're back here at the basics of, I just want to make sure that we're getting meaningful data from my child. So what are some approaches that you would use in that kind of a situation?
Documentation, whether it's pieces of artwork, whether it's photographs, whether it's video, whether it's a little one-pager that you put together about all about me kind of thing. What's my child's strengths? What are my child's ways of communicating? How will I know when they're hungry? How will I know? And again, I'm talking about young children and then, you know, older nonverbal kids as well. You know, what are their signs? And so that's all good data. And you're the expert in that regard. You see them at home, you see them at their best and their crankiest, at their awake and they're tired. You know, you see them at all phases. And so, you know, being able to articulate that in a way, Family Ties has this great training called Let's Get Organized. And it really is an opportunity to think about, what do I need to collect? If in this case of an emergency and my child is rushed to the hospital, you know, do I have current medications? Do I, you know, what do I need to gather together? And it's not just, you know, we used to do it in a binder. We used to have everybody set up, build a binder. And, you know, we're in the technology age now. And so how do you do that electronically? How do you create those folders? How do you create that, put it on a zip drive and so forth? And so there is wonderful data that you should be, not could, but I would encourage you that the word is should be sharing at team meetings about what you've seen, particularly if there's been a summer break and you're with your child more often than you were during the school year. that's when everybody is, figuring out, okay, are we keeping up with those skills? Is there any regression? What supports are going to be needed when he gets back to school? So again, that's all examples of opportunities to collect data.
And I think it's important for parents also to be clear on what they're measuring, right? I think a lot of times we have a lot of, it's almost ambiguous or unclear. And so if you can't actually identify the behavior or the skill, then it's harder to measure it. And if you can, so I think it's important for people to be very clear on what is the real question you're asking? What is it that you're trying to better understand? And then in order, once you've answered that question, then you can answer, well, how would I measure that particular issue or that challenge? I think very often you have to really learn how to scale it down and be concrete and clear, because it's very hard to measure unclear things, right?
Absolutely. And, when you think about those kids who present with challenging behaviors and, thinking about doing what's often called a functional behavioral assessment, what's the behavior telling you? Again, it's looking, it's observing, what are the antecedents to, and whether it's an outburst or a meltdown or, refusal, and, just plopping themselves down on the floor and they won't move. And, what happened right before that? What are they trying to avoid? Are they just trying to get attention? What's the function of the behavior? And that's good data to be compiling. That way you can tell, does it oftentimes happen when they're in this frame of mind? When does it happen at a certain time of day? Does it happen with a certain person? We all push each other's buttons. And so, think about, again, it's collecting that data and then trying to figure out what story does it tell you.
Right. And as Amen was putting in the chat, the difference between whether or not a child is able to do something by themselves or with prompts,
Yep.
And for that matter,
Yep.
what kind of prompts, how often, in what settings, all of those things make a difference.
Right.
As to,
And we all know that our kids oftentimes act completely different at school than they do at home.
Absolutely.
And so, that's all good data to be sharing, because if there are skills your child are exhibiting at home, cleaning up after themselves at the dinner table, bringing their plates to the sink, and yet they get up from snack time and they're leaving a mess, they are capable of doing it. And to be able to say to staff, this is what happens at home. I would encourage you to say, come on, again, poor Johnny, I just keep picking on Johnny. Johnny, let's go. I know that you clear your table after dinner, and so making sure that expectations are clear, but in both the home and the school environment, so that, kids are smart. They're going to try and get away with what they can get away with. They're pretty savvy that way. So again, it's good data. It's sharing that data and benefiting from your contributions as well as the contributions that are coming from the staff.
All right, so as we're wrapping up, we have about 5 minutes left tonight. It's amazing how quickly things can go when you're talking about something so interesting like this. Are there any other questions that people have?
I did put in the chat, Beth and Pat, that I find a lot of CPACs are always looking for data about their district, about maybe individual schools within their district. And I put the link to the DESE school and district profile page there. And that's a real wealth of information that you can get a lot of information about your school, enrollment, graduation rates, discipline, lots of things. So that is a great website. And if anyone has any questions about that or can't find something, just contact the Federation and we can help you dig a little deeper there, because it is a difficult page.
Yeah.
Most bureaucratic websites are.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be a state agency if there wasn't some level of complexity to it, right?
That's right. That's right.
But I really want to encourage everyone here to participate in these focus groups and also to spread the word to other parents that you know. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with other parents, whether it be in a meeting or over coffee, over dinner, and they often say, you know, we don't have a voice. People don't want to hear what we have to say. We clearly know all of the problems and nobody's listening to us. This is your open invitation to actually provide some input and some data, for that matter, that DESE could actually use and be part of the solution. So this is being done very intentionally. The collaboration with the Federation was also very intentional. And as you know, we always have our commitment here to make sure that families, no matter what language they speak, have the opportunity to provide input and feedback. So there's a number of dates here, and there is a link on the website, and also you'll see it at the bottom right-hand corner on this particular page, so that you can register for one or more of these sessions. So we encourage you to do that. This is a real opportunity for your voice to be heard. And you know, we will find out afterwards how they've used this data that they're getting directly from parents. There are a lot of things that are being done well, and there are other things that are not going well for parents across the state and for children across the state. And one of the best resources for figuring out whether or not we got it right are the parents who are taking care of these kids that we all care about so much. So please make sure that you take the opportunity to have some input in this process.
Well, and I really appreciate, you know, and I know Cambria does as well, being able to have this platform to share what we learned through the grant that we have through the Data Systems DAISY Center, and there's all kinds of information on their website that you may find beneficial. And so I encourage you to visit it and practice, even if you practice at home, you know, looking at that, your bank statement, and, you know, and figuring out what data does it tell me? Did it tell me I really blew it in March and, you know, and overspent? Or does it tell me, you know, I could have saved here, I could have saved there, and how you plan for the future, the upcoming holidays and so forth. So, you know, then there's ways to apply these same strategies to your own life as well.
All right, well, there doesn't seem to be any other questions coming through, an unusually quiet crowd tonight. But Pat, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and what you've learned with us tonight. And also please relay our appreciation to Cambria,
I will.
your co-facilitator or co-creator of this. And we look forward to learning more and hearing more. And again, everybody, please make sure that you take advantage of this opportunity and spread the word. We really want to have as much representation from as many different families as possible in this process. So if there's a way that you can make this happen, take full advantage of it.
Across the ages, you know, we want a representation across ages, across communities, across ethnic groups, and so forth. Again, it's being translated in several languages, and you know, being able to have groups that can share this information together is critical.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we will now close up for the night, but thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you, Pat, for sharing this wonderful information. And until we see each other again, everybody be safe, be well, and remember that the Federation is always here to support you in any way that we can. So have a great evening.
Thank you all.